Welcome everyone. My name is Adriana Link, and I am the head of scholarly programming at the American Philosophical Society. The Society resides in Lenape-Hoking, the homeland of the Lenape people, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. The APS acknowledges with respect their continued presence and perseverance, and expresses its sincere thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of numerous Indigenous communities and individuals who have offered their guidance, expertise, and opportunities for collaboration. Welcome to the second day of our virtual conference, Responsibilities, Reciprocity, and Relationships, Indigenous Studies in the Archives and Beyond. We are glad that so many of you have joined us today. A reminder that our conversation will continue tomorrow with 2 sessions at 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and that a full schedule of events may be found on our website. We will also be recording these sessions, so please tell your friends and colleagues who are unable to attend today's session. This week's conference is inspired by the important work of the APS's Center for Native American and Indigenous Research and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation-funded Native American Scholars Initiative program. For those joining us for the first time, the American Philosophical Society was founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1743. The Society is a catalyst for the discovery of new knowledge. Election to membership honors those who have made significant contributions to science, the arts and humanities, and public life. The Society promotes research by providing over $1 million in research grants a year, especially to younger scholars who need that support the most. Our library and museum collections at research centers serve scholars and visitors from across the globe. Please check out our website, www.amphilsoc.org, to learn more about what we do and for news of upcoming events such as this one. We are using a Zoom webinar today, so do not worry, you are all muted and there's no fear of interruption from any cats, lawnmowers, or any other noise. If you have a question, we encourage you to use the Q&A button at the bottom center of your navigation bar. You can type your question in there at any time during today's conversation. There will also be time at the end of the panel for questions with our speakers. We will be sure to share any unanswered questions with our speakers at the end of the event, and we'll work to make the responses available to all of you on our website. We're excited too to offer closed captioning for this conference. If you would like to use it during the discussion, please click on the CC box on the bottom navigation bar of Zoom. It is to the right of the Q&A button. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Stephen Curley, who will be moderating today's second panel on outreach and relationship building through Indigenous materials. Stephen Curley is an enrolled member of the Diné or Navajo Nation and is the Director of Digital Archives for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. He is a professional archivist and holds a master's in library and information science from the University of Arizona. He has extensive experience working with tribal community archives and museums and has worked with tribal governments, groups, and communities regarding the development of cultural heritage institutional services, programming, and information management capacities. From 2018 to 2019, he served as the chair of the Society of American Archivists Native American Archive Section and is currently serving as a council member for the Society of American Archivists for the 2020 to 2023 term. Welcome, Stephen. Glad to have you with us.
Great, thank you very much, Adriana. Yes, as Adriana has mentioned, I am with the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, and I also today I have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed colleagues who have presented or who will be presenting papers that they have prepared for this second day of the APS Summit. Let me turn on my video so you know what I look like. Hello. So as I mentioned, there are 3 papers being presented, and I think we'll just actually go down the line as they're presented or represented in the program for today. The first one is titled Consult, Collaborate, and Listen, Decolonizing Archival Research, and that is authored by Kelsey Grimm of Indiana University and also Krystiana Krupa, my apologies, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Kelsey Grimm works as the librarian and archivist for Indiana University's newly created Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. She received her master's degree in information and library science, specializing in rare books and special collections in 2013. Since beginning work at her current institution, Kelsey has assisted in digitizing and making freely available close to 18,000 documents related to the Native experience in the American Midwest, thanks to collaborations with several tribes. She's interested in bridging the gap between special collections and Native communities and wants to continue to learn and grow across the profession. Krystiana Krupa serves as the NAGPRA program officer for the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Her current work addresses the ethical and legal responsibilities that the university has to sovereign tribal nations as they relate to the as they relate to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, also known as NAGPRA. Before coming to Illinois, she worked in the Indiana University NAGPRA office for several years, where she worked closely with archive staff to conduct NAGPRA compliance work. Because of this work, she advocates for close collaboration between tribal nations, archivists, and repatriation practitioners as a way to appropriately care for collections and prioritize Indigenous knowledges. So that is the first paper. The second paper is going to be titled Putting Indigenous Priorities First, Consultation and Residential School Records at the BC Archives. And that is co-authored again by Genevieve Weber at the Royal BC Museum and Archives and Margaret Teneese of the Ktunaxa Nation. Genevieve Weber has been an outreach archivist and community liaison with the BC Archives, situated in traditional Lekwungen territory in Victoria, BC since 2016. She has the privilege of working with Indigenous communities from all over the province, assisting with research requests, providing access to records, and facilitating workshops on topics such as researching community history and Indigenous genealogy. Other programs delivered include family history workshops, special interest workshops, community tours, introductory class visits, and school activities. She received her Master in Archival Studies, First Nations concentration curriculum from the University of British Columbia in 2008. Again, with that paper is Margaret Teneese, is of Ktunaxa Secwepemc ancestry and was born and raised and now lives in Ktunaxa. Margaret established the Ktunaxa Nation Archives in the mid-1990s and is currently working at the Ktunaxa Nation Archives. Prior to that, she worked in various capacities throughout the years at the Ktunaxa Nation Council, one of which was the language program. These years of service with the Ktunaxa Nation Council resulted in a lengthy passion for learning and disseminating information in a form of cultural awareness presentations. These presentations are held at St. Eugene Mission Resort, which was once a residential school where Aboriginal children were sent. These presentations attract a multitude of participants, all the way from public schools, government ministries, and organizations. And last but not least is, of course, the third paper titled Reaching for Community-Based Scholarships and Partnerships in the Humanities. And that is authored by Jamie Mize of the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Jamie Mize is a historian of American Indians of the Southern United States. She is an assistant professor of American Indian Studies and History at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Mize is also the program director for the university's new Pembroke Mellon Reach program that seeks to increase the number of underrepresented minorities in faculty positions in institutions of higher education across the United States. And so these are all of our panelists for today. And first up, we will have both Kelsey Grimm and Krystiana Krupa.
Hello. I'm going to start. So we're happy you're joining us today for our presentation. And a big thank you to the American Philosophical Society for organizing this amazing conference. We really enjoyed the conference so far. Slide. As we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the tribes indigenous to the lands we live and work on. Listed on the slide are the official land acknowledgements of the universities Krystiana and I work for, which recognize the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, Shawnee, Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Leah, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sac, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. But we'd also like to recognize those not named in treaties and the ancestral groups preceding them all. We encourage those of you listening to learn more about the tribes in your area, and I hope that these sessions become a catalyst for you to collaborate with and listen to the Native peoples around you. Slide. So who are we? My name is Kelsey Grimm, as was stated before, and I currently work as the librarian archivist for the newly formed Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology at Indiana University. My background is in rare books and special collections, and until I started working for an archaeology lab, I had never heard of NAGPRA or even thought about repatriation. Slide.
My name is Krystiana Krupa, and I serve as the NAGPRA officer for the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm an anthropologist by training and not an archivist. And before coming to Illinois, I spent several years working for Indiana University's NAGPRA office, where I worked regularly with Kelsey, my co-presenter, and learned through that work that archives are invaluable for the NAGPRA process. Next slide, please. So NAGPRA refers to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which was established in 1990, so 30 years ago, this November, actually. And NAGPRA provides a legal framework for the return of Native ancestors and cultural items to their descendants and their communities. So NAGPRA documentation benefits tremendously from archival collections, and they provide context for understanding most archaeological and ethnographic collections that fall under NAGPRA's purview. Most importantly, for the purposes of this particular discussion, NAGPRA requires museums and other institutions to consult with tribal nations as part of this process. And this is the part of NAGPRA that's the most difficult to understand simply from reading the law. Next slide, please. Consultation is the critical component of the NAGPRA process, and consultation as a term is not defined by the law, but effective repatriation practitioners note regularly that NAGPRA is primarily about building relationships. So when consultation refers to regular interactions between people or groups of people, it promotes the kind of transparency and mutual respect that spur collaborative projects. It also opens up conversations about what types of collections are housed in museums and universities, even if they don't exactly fall under NAGPRA. And I want to emphasize here that while documents are not typically thought to fall under NAGPRA's purview, archival and NAGPRA practitioners both benefit from the reciprocal relationships that are brought about by these conversations. Next slide, please.
So though there have been a number of collaborative projects coming out of NAGPRA consultations at IU, we're going to look at one in particular that focuses around the Great Lakes Ohio Valley Ethnohistory Collection, or as we like to call it, the GLOVE. So let's note here, though, that we're located at an academic institution, an archive within an active research facility and museum, facets that both affect access and description practices within the archive. Next slide. So the GLOVE is made up of documents that chronicle the history of land use and tribal occupancy around the Great Lakes region, those areas marked in red. These documents were then used to create ethnohistorical reports submitted in the U.S. Indian Claims Commission cases of the 1950s and 1960s. Click. Ethnohistory is the study of people through written records. Generally, though, those records were not written by the group of people being studied. Next slide. The most used series of the GLOVE is the Tribal History Document Series. When the original project researchers found documents related to how land was used, they translated, photocopied, typed, or otherwise transcribed the relevant passage and brought it back to be organized. The documents were arranged into tribal groups and then chronologically within that tribe, all very Western ways of organizing. In total, the series is made up of 256 archival boxes. We've estimated that there are over 157,000 pages in this series, but notably, these are not the originals. They are essentially research notes that have been kept. They represent information from a variety of sources scattered across the world, but have been brought together to create something new. We know from correspondence that the Department of Justice specifically requested only Euro-American perspectives, so this collection is very one-sided. Native voices are not directly represented, which is a huge hole in the historical narrative. Despite this, and the collection's strengths and failings, click, Native communities want access. Next slide. In 2015, a summer research fellowship brought Ben Barnes, then second chief, but now current chief of the Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma, to view the glove. Conversations at that time brought the issue of access to the forefront. Limited access particularly impacts the core tribal communities whose heritage is documented in the materials and who were historically removed from the region. Many descendant tribes now reside outside of the Great Lakes Midwest region, with prohibitive time and travel costs required to access the physical collection in Indiana. Digitizing these materials and making them freely accessible online is in some small part helps restore these histories to the communities they most directly represent. Chief Barnes, in writing about digitizing the glove, emphasized the possibility to recontextualize the narratives of the Shawnee people by the Shawnee people. Next slide. In the past 5 years, we've worked with the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma, and are currently working with the Wyandot Nation to digitize portions of the glove. Each tribe receives high-resolution TIFFs, click, a complete bibliography of sources and associated metadata, and we host the images on our collection finding aid, but point to their websites at the top of the finding aid. Click. Any sensitive information found within the documents will be treated the way the tribal partners want. Through these collaborations, more than 18,000 pages have been digitized in the glove. Next slide.
So digitization and making collections available online is one possible solution for sharing and promoting access to archival materials, although we recognize these actions may not be appropriate for all types of resources. Archivists really need to understand also that digital repatriation is not the same as physical repatriation. And full repatriation, whether it's through NAGPRA or some other means, is another possible avenue towards decolonizing the archive. If a tribe isn't able to take physical control of a collection because of space, funding, staffing, or other issues, a possible compromise might be a written agreement where the community makes decisions about collections that remain within the curating institution. We already know that this happens with archaeological collections, and by giving communities control over their material collections, they gain control over their own heritage. Next slide, please.
Archival professionals must reach out to descendant communities, not wait for them to contact the institution. We must center and prioritize Indigenous interests and goals to become better stewards of these collections. I want archivists and librarians to know about NAGPRA and to understand that documents, not just artifacts, can be returned to source communities. We realize that each institution, collection, and tribal nation is in a different situation and will necessitate different solutions, but you won't know until you ask, and then you listen. These conversations and collaborations will not be without challenges, but they will bring a lasting impact on the way to decolonizing archival collections and research. Next slide. So thank you very much for our presentation. There's our contact information there, and we look forward to any questions and comments you have at the end of these presentations.
Hello, my name is Genevieve Weber, and I'm an archivist for the BC Archives at the Royal BC Museum, which is in British Columbia. and on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, and I live and work, now I work from home on the shared territory of the traditional Lekwungen speaking people and the Wasanich. And I'm very privileged to work and live and play here every day. And I'm so grateful to be here, and I just wanted to say that the presentation just now and the presentations this morning, it's wonderful to be part of a panel like this with people from other parts of the world and to see the similarities and some of the work that we're doing and the interesting crossovers. It's really exciting to be part of this. And I'm very happy to be presenting with my co-presenter, Margaret Teneese of the Ktunaxa Nation, who I will let her introduce herself when after I've given my little talk here. So the BC Archives is the provincial repository for the government of BC. So we hold the government records for the provincial government, but we also hold records of individuals, families, organizations, companies, any other non-government organization that our mandate is to collect records that represent the province as a whole, the people and places and industry of British Columbia. And today the presentation is going to talk about one particular project and a group of records that we have that have come into our collections, and how we've built consultation into the processing of those records early on in working with the records before we make them public. And I'll be speaking specifically about consultation with the Ktunaxa Nation, although I should be clear that we are also working with other Indigenous communities on this particular collection of records as well. Next slide, please. The Oblates of Mary Immaculate are an international organization, religious organization of missionary priests. They first came to British Columbia in the early 19th century and established missionary sites around the province. And in addition to missionary sites, they also established and ran 10 residential schools, which are similar to the boarding schools that were in the United States. The image here is of St. Eugene's Residential School in Pembroke, which, as Margaret, I'm sure, will explain more later, is now, the building is now owned by the Ktunaxa Nation. Traditionally, these records are, by traditional archival theory, these records would be considered to be owned and created by the priests, by the Oblates themselves. But with there's been a big shift in thinking in Canadian archives in recent years around ownership. And as mentioned in the presentation just now and in this morning's presentation, the information and knowledge that is contained in these records, although it wasn't written down or the photographs weren't taken by the Indigenous people represented in them, the information really belongs to those communities. And we're recognizing that this must be recognized early on, and that we should be working with these communities to determine the outcome of the records, including access policies, which records should remain private and restricted and only accessible to the communities. So in the past, the BC Archives would have received a collection like this, done the processing work, done some arrangement and description on it, published the descriptions online, and opened them up, whatever records we determined were open and accessible, opened them up to researchers. What we've done differently in this case is ensure that we are reaching out to the communities first and doing the consultation before we put the results online. So there's a number of policy documents that guide how and why we do this consultation. Next slide, please. Including the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, which ended a few years ago and was related to the residential school legacy in Canada. It published a number of calls to action that clearly determined that we should be consulting with communities first before making information publicly accessible. This has led to a new set of protocols which are in their draft form and being reviewed by the public at the moment. They're similar to the protocols for Native American archival materials, but more specific to a Canadian context. But probably most importantly, in November of 2019, the BC provincial government passed legislation to implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People throughout the province. So this is really important as a government employee, that we are actually legislated that we have to meet the requirements of UNDRIP in the work that we do, and all of the work that we do. So our institution had already taken on UNDRIP as a guiding principle for our organization, but now the government also determines that we have to meet those needs. So that's where that term that we keep hearing, that line, free, prior, and informed consent, really comes from UNDRIP, and that is a driving force behind the work that we do. The images that are on the screen now are from a group that came from the Ktunaxa Nation in February. They came to Victoria. And how we have been working to do this consultation as we process records is to reach out to the communities and have them lead the way. So we really want to know what they want in terms of the collaborative work that we're doing together. So in my experience, I find that we get huge benefits. The organization gets huge benefits out of it, no matter what direction we end up going in. But we're letting the communities, as much as possible, we want them to tell us what they want to get out of accessing the records ahead of time. And Margaret will speak to that in a moment. So for us, some of the benefits include, as you can see in these images, the two brothers that are looking at photos there, Frankie and Bradley Alexander. They were able to identify for us hundreds, just in a 2-day period, hundreds of images. So we now can identify people, places, and activities that were happening in the photographs that are part of the collection. Don Sam, who's in the bottom corner, was looking through documentation and textual records and is able to, we're hoping that going forward, this project of course has been somewhat on hold because of COVID, but we're hoping going forward we'll be able to continue a conversation around community protocols, around what information in those records should be kept private. If we do, when we go ahead to digitize records, what is the community's priority for digitizing records? And if we put those online, should they be put online for everyone to see? Or should they be digitized and shared only within the community? And that's the type of information that we can't decide on our own. We really need to be working with the community to determine what those rights are. So I'm going to pass it over to Margaret now to talk a little bit more from her perspective about what this project has been like.
Welcome to the Ktunaxa territory. That's where I'm basically home. So we traveled to Victoria when we found out that these records were being made available. There was myself, I'm the archivist for the Ktunaxa Nation. Don Sam is our Director of Traditional Knowledge and Language Sector. Michelle Broca, she is our records manager, as well as she's got a background in archives. There's Frankie and Bradley, they're cultural assistants, and they kind of work in the summertime for the Hakapashninam, and in the wintertime they work with me. And they sort of shined when we took them to Victoria, because that's the kind of work they were doing with in my office, was digitizing photographs and other material and things like that, and renaming them and getting them in order. So they kind of went to that right away. It's timely that these records came available when they did, because in this year, well, it passed. We have our, from June 2020 was the 50 years since the St. Eugene Residential School closed. So we were going to have a big gathering in June, and when these records came available, it was like, wow, we wanted to find out if there was anything in there that we would need for this opening. But because of COVID, we got more time, so we're going to push that to 2021. So this is, again, gives us enough time to look through the information we all sort of got there and decided, okay, we're going to look at as much as we can to find out what is priority in terms of what will be useful for the 50-year. So the committee for the 50-year anniversary group there, they were quite anxious to see what is available in there as well. Photographs. There were some when the school was first built and things like that. So those were kind of the things that we were looking at in terms of right away. And then we also have our long-term goals in terms of working with them as well, with the BC Rural Museum. So that's basically what my presentation here is about. Anything you want to add there, Genevieve?
No, that was great. Thank you, Margaret. And we hope to make the paper available soon. I apologize that it wasn't available for this presentation, but thank you. And this final photo is the entire group when they came out to visit in February. And I want to make, I guess, the final point of how important meeting in person is, and collaborating and working together in person can have such wonderful results. So thank you, Margaret.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I want to thank everybody for attending, and special thanks to the American Philosophical Society for hosting this. I am going to talk today about the REACH program, and specifically the oral history project that we're doing within that grant program. Next slide. So just a couple of things to let you know what the REACH program is. It is a $950,000 grant from the Andrew Mellon Foundation. And the purpose of the grant is to essentially get more underrepresented minorities in higher education. So students that are selected to be part of this program are working on advanced research projects. And in addition to that, they're also doing the oral history project. UNCP is a great place for this. The institution was founded in 1887 as an Indian normal school, and it's still the only four-year public institution in the United States that was founded by American Indians for American Indian people. This aligns very well with our REACH goals, which is to elevate Native students. So the oral history project, each REACH
Jamie, there's a delay in your bandwidth, it seems. Is there any way you can turn off your video? Sorry to interrupt. Is there any way you can turn off your video so that your bandwidth catches up with your audio?
Genevieve, are you still, or Jamie, are you still with us? All right, apologies everyone. We're having a unprecedented technological glitch. So hopefully this will resolve momentarily. All right, Jamie, you're still, okay, Jamie, why don't you try logging out and logging back in? Okay, in the meantime, I don't know, Stephen, if you want to ask a question of our speakers.
Yeah, there's actually a really good one here. I think it's kind of a baseline, very philosophical sort of question. And I think it's kind of appropriate to really highlight, semantics, like how we are conversing with one another in this discourse about how we're conceptualizing some of these initiatives regarding consultation and engagement, and by extension to engagement outreach, and what those two things look like and what those two things sort of consist of. So one of the questions was, what are some of the differences between consultation with Indigenous communities and engagement with Indigenous communities in managing archives? I'm curious as to what either of the presenters or panelists' thoughts are, and sort of compartmentalizing these two activities, consultation versus engagement.
So I invite Krystiana and Kelsey and Margaret and Genevieve to turn their cameras on for a second.
Do I sound okay now?
Oh, you do sound okay. Okay, never mind. We'll table that question. Apologies all, and we'll let Jamie continue on with her presentation.
Okay, I apologize. I'm just going to leave my video off so maybe it doesn't happen again.
Okay.
But as I was saying, each REACH fellow will conduct 3 interviews, and then those will be archived here at the university. So it's actually a really exciting project in the fact that we're creating the archive from the ground up, rather than kind of collecting existing materials. We're creating them, which is incredibly exciting. Students prepare for these oral history interviews in workshops over the summer, in which they learned best practices. Those were conducted by the Oral History Center at UC Berkeley, as well as our very own Museum of the Southeast American Indian here at UNCP. Next slide, please. So our community partner is the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. The Lumbee are a coalescent society and their ancestors are Siouan, Algonquin, and Iroquois speaking peoples. Today, there are approximately 55 members of the Lumbee Tribe, and they reside in the Pembroke County region that I have outlined for you here: Robinson, Cumberland, Oak, and Scott counties. The university is located in Pembroke, which is in Robinson County, and Pembroke is the cultural and political center of the Lumbee Tribe. The Lumbee people have had state recognition since 1885. In 1956, during the era of termination here in the United States, a congressional bill recognized them as Indian and immediately terminated their relationship with the federal government. So today they do not have full federal recognition, and that is something that they are still striving to achieve. Next slide, please. So we're working directly with them on this oral history project. Our point of contact with tribal government is Ms. Tammy Maynor. Over our conversations, we've discussed kind of some of the questions that we wanted to ask, which I'll detail more in just a second. But really the overarching goal of this project is to record their histories, a lot of their cultural stories. And so to that end, the tribe is actually soliciting participants that are willing to be interviewed. The REACH fellows have been instructed, best methods in terms of creating questions that aren't too leading, and really just having a conversation to allow people to take the conversation where they want to go and record the information they wish to. These fellows will transcribe the interviews, and then those will be returned to the interviewee, and they'll ultimately have the final say. This is a copy of everything here on campus, and then we're partnering with the museum here that I've already mentioned to create a digital archive as well. Next slide, please. So everything that we're doing is really based on the ideas in red pedagogy. So this is an Indigenous pedagogy that operates the intersection of Indigenous knowledge and Western theory. It's the space of engagement for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous scholars that work to remember, redefine, and reverse the devastation of colonialism. And so that's also what we're trying to do with this oral history project. It's a way, pedagogy is a way of thinking about knowledge and the processes of teaching and learning as it emerges within and through relationships between students, like outreach fellows, between teachers like me, and community members. Next slide, please. Next slide. Ooh, sorry. Here are a list of the initial draft of questions that our fellows came up with. The earlier questions are those that are general, geared toward getting a conversation going. And the latter ones focus more on questions of identity and what it means to be American. And this is kind of influenced both by these conversations in written pedagogy about democracy and sovereignty, but also align very well with recent scholarship on Lumbee history. Next slide. So Melinda Maynor Lowry's most recent book came out in 2018, The Lumbee Indians and American Struggle. And here, Lowry is exploring different hierarchies of power and privilege based on constructed notions of race and ethnicity. And these various different categories continue to inform understandings of who is an American, who can be American, as well as, you know, who is Lumbee and how they who determines the definition of quote-unquote Indianness. This book is a reconciliation of what it means to be Lumbee American, and hopefully the oral histories will be, we collect as part of this project will be a continued record of that. Next slide. And just to kind of give you a little bit more insight into these identities, on the right side, we have the pinecone patchwork quilt, which is located here in our museum. The pinecone patchwork design is very much, you know, part of the Lumbee iconography. In this part of the world, you don't see that design without associating it with the Lumbee people. And on the left here, we have a more contemporary piece of art by Monroe. And I think this really kind of captures the spirit and the purpose and really the interrogations of what the oral history project is seeking to explore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of the panelists, for presenting your papers. I understand that there might have been a little bit of audio issues, and we could still, you know, hear things intelligibly. So thank you very much for all of you to sharing your thoughts and your papers. Let me turn on my video here. So I'm hoping my audio doesn't start acting up. But I was kind of, when I was approached by APS, I was sort of given the opportunity to sort of to share some of my initial thoughts about what it means for outreach and what it means for engagement, and you know, sort of overarching themes associated with some of the papers that were shared with you all today. So I kind of wanted to promise myself, for sake of time, but also I kind of wanted to promise myself that I wouldn't pontificate to you all for fear of being too patronizing. But then I thought, this is a philosophical association. This is the perfect setting to pontificate. And then I asked myself, with the age-old question, to pontificate or not to pontificate? That is the question. So again, I want to thank the American Philosophical Society for inviting me to join in these very insightful discussions relating to relationship building, responsibilities, and reciprocity. So this session, of course, was focused on outreach and relationship building. To me, relationship building is dependent on outreach. So for my linear way of thinking, I wanted to focus on outreach specifically in terms of my approach, but also some of the things that I've observed and what was shared with you just right now. I typically think of outreach as sort of the first point of contact or interfacing between separate, unique entities, which is of course sort of like the awkward phase, and then there's the continued outreach, which is if you made it to that point, probably becomes part of the programmatic for your institutions, and if done so right in the right manner, can lead to long-term successes. So before I get into this, I'd like to state the obvious, because I'm a master of the obvious, and it may be helpful for some of you who come into these conversations with little or no experience interfacing with tribal peoples, is one, U.S. tribal nations are separate and unique political entities with inherent sovereignty, established in extra-legal and extra-constitutional frameworks of the laws of the United States. So treaties are, of course, the laws of the land, and so a lot of these considerations and provisions are sort of self-evident, and they should be adhered to at any sort of avenue that is presented to you. A lot of my commentary will focus on my frame of reference through my work with North American tribal communities, but there's a whole other facet involving international indigenous discourse that I can't really speak to, just because that's not really my frame of reference. So lastly, tribal communities in the U.S. are not special interest groups or ethnic communities. They are instead tribal, they're adhering to consultation sort of stipulations that are codified in NAGPRA law and other similar acts. So outreach can, of course, manifest in a variety of ways, as we've seen. The most prominent ways they sort of relate to modifying measures of access. On the flip side, creating newly formed measures of restriction. There could be new methods of reassessing description, and through those means, augmenting and enhancing those descriptions through something that I like to call holistic curation, because that's ultimately what's being done is when we're enhancing our descriptions at our institutions. There can also be potential for project development and community engagement with the collections that formulate out of concerns about lack of access. So we all know that source communities are dramatically disconnected from or starkly disconnected from source institutions wherever those collections may exist, sometimes being thousands of miles across the continent or even internationally. So that is pretty ubiquitous is what the case is. And we all know that. There can be also a variety of ways that outreach as an activity of providing services to a population can be expressed as an initiative. I think there's actually some thematics that I'd like to hone in on. And so one of the things that is kind of like a baseline question is whether or not you are ready to put yourself out there, and two, whether or not your institution is up to snuff really in establishing meaningful dialogues by meaning what you say and also following through with what is promised to those source communities. So there's elements of transparency and being trusted institutions, but also trusted people who work at those institutions. For some of you, you know full well that there is indeed an aversion that tribal people have to institutions. whether they be cultural heritage institutions or medical organizations or educational institutions, so on and so forth. There's definitely a history there and a learned mistrust that has come out of it, that tribal communities have learned to mistrust these types of institutions. And remember that when Native communities reach out to you as non-tribal, it's not a superficial general interest request. It's really a quest for reclaiming their lost or stolen history a lot of the time. So that kind of brings into tenets or discussions of restorative justice and what does that mean, questions of access, navigating questions of restriction. Similarly, reclamation for these source communities come into play with all of those tenets. So again, for those non-tribal institutions, a lot of the onus falls on you to create favorable conditions of trust and respect that are steeped in accountability and transparency. And of course, that's not special to just Native people, as there are definitely parallels to other disenfranchised communities. So conversations about, changing reading room policy to make institutions more inviting are now becoming the norm, given how policing and by extension of that, security tactics are being rethought and revised. So there's a lot that we can learn from other disenfranchised communities by doing the same sorts of strategies and tactics of outreach and engagement. So it's really just having active listening and deep listening, sort of be sort of absorbed into your professional repertoire, essentially. So particularly spaces rife with traditions and attitudes of elitism need to approach this introspectively. So let's kind of get into humanistic sort of processes. And Athenaeums, in my mind, Athenaeums and private university spaces can be epitome of snobbery and pretension. So this is kind of where I'm pontificating again. So I say they can be, of course, because we're all aware, we're all well aware of the APS having navigated these types of concerns, and yet there were still relatively recent changes. So I think it was in 2008 when APS drafted their own protocols, and correct me if I'm wrong, Adriana or Brian, but this is definitely a seminal document, as a lot of people know about it. And it is, of course, one of the first instances where a large institution took measures to rectify these concerns that we're discussing today. And so for the sake of time, I'd like to introduce some questions here. And so one of the questions that I had brought up earlier was, and this goes for all of you if you want to jump in, is there a difference in sort of your conceptual framework between consultation and engagement?
I'll go ahead and jump in. For me, there's a power difference in that relationship. For consultation, I'm learning from the group I'm consulting with. For engagement, like if I engage students on campus, it's them using the collections, and there's a different power dynamic there. In application, I don't think I would be allowed at my university to consult with the tribes directly. There's a lot of administrative overhead that goes into consultations, and I would engage with them on a collection level very differently than the consultation would take place, if that answers it.
Yeah, and I think that you made the point there by saying that the difference is the power dynamic. And Stephen, I think you described outreach as that initial point of contact. So Margaret and I, for example, first met when I reached out to her about different records that we had in the collection a few years ago. And it can be that awkward thing. It's like, first, trying to desperately make friends with somebody and contact them and say, look, we've got this stuff, we'd love to talk to you about it. But then there's it's a shift when you go, and not everybody likes the word consultation, and it has very different meanings in different contexts, depending on if you're working for a provincial agency or a federal agency, if you're in Canada or the States. And so sometimes maybe collaboration or another word might be used interchangeably. But I think for me, the big difference is that when we reached out with these records to the Ktunaxa and to other communities, we really are hoping that they will be decision makers in the process. So, you know, I'm asking Margaret to share her expertise, and I'm asking her colleagues to share her expertise around what should happen with these records. I am not, I mean, I'm still, obviously I work in a colonial institution, and there is that a power dynamic that's at play there automatically, but I am doing everything I can to make sure that the power is handed over as much as possible, or at least balanced to some degree. Margaret, do you have?
Yeah, basically living up here in Canada, we have the consultation, which is a legal thing that all industry has to partake in. And I don't really get involved with that, with the archives. It's more collaboration, more engagement, where we have the say in terms of what happens to the materials there, in terms of sensitivity and restrictions and things like that. So that will be the next step, is to go through some of the materials there to find out if there's anything there that shouldn't be shared, but can be shared with our people in terms of whatever it might be. So that's kind of like where we're at with this. So consultation to me is at a higher level with the whole tribe, and these kind of things they don't need to get involved with, because these are basically working with the Royal BC Museum. We already have an agreement as a nation with the BC Royal Museum, saying that this is how we're going to work. So if that answers any of the questions.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to think about there for sure. Is there anybody else that wanted to jump in for that question?
I can just quickly sort of emphasize what everyone else was saying about it being more about sort of a legal structure and a power structure difference. So being an institutional NAGPRA representative, my job is to consult sort of at the administrative level. And I think that through consultation, I can initiate engagement, but being someone who is not actively working with the collections for the most part, that's not really something that I feel I can do myself, is the actual engagement part of the process with connecting people with collections and those kinds of things. So I tend to personally view it as more of sort of consultation being used to initiate engagement. And so they're very closely connected, but I certainly would say that they're different, and they complement each other, but are definitely different processes.
Yeah, definitely. And there's actually another follow-up question, not a different individual, but one of the more pressing things that for archival practitioners, worldwide are having to deal with is, of course, the coronavirus. And so we still have to do our work with consultation, and we need to do our due diligence to be able to have these very meaningful conversations with source communities. So one of the questions is how have any of the panelists experimented with conducting virtual consultations, and how did that go?
During the pandemic, I would say I've been trying to take advantage of the time to do that initial making contact piece with some other communities that that I hope that will enter into more specific consultation with in the future, but it's been really hard because I've been at home, and it's really hard to do consultation on archival records if you can't hold the records in your hand. BC is geographically very vast. It's very, very large. So we do often do a lot of this work virtually anyway, but I do tend to do it with the documents in front of me and a camera. So then one of the very first times that I met with Margaret and the Ktunaxa group that eventually came to Victoria, we did it over, I don't think it was Zoom, but over a video call. And I had samples of the records out at my workstation, and I was able to use my camera in a very makeshift way to give them an idea of what we were talking about. And it's such an important part to actually see the records, not just to hear me talk about what it looks like, what the document is, but to be able to have a look at them in some way. So it's been tough. So, I'm just focusing on sending out as many emails and phone calls as I can for now.
Yeah, I want to sort of bring that back around to something that I think Genevieve said earlier about how important it is to talk with people in person as much as you can. I think for consultation, that's really critical. And so, having these kinds of conversations during a pandemic is really hard, because it's great to talk about things like this over the phone or over email or over Zoom, but it's not the same as having them in person. And so I think we're all trying to do the best that we can, but I know that I personally, and I'm sure everyone else on the call, is really looking forward to when we can consult again in person, because that sort of really facilitates the transparency and trust and respect sort of aspect of consultation that is really important for moving forward with these kinds of things.
Yeah, I know for... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, I just wanted to just so that you kind of know where I'm coming from here. In British Columbia, in Canada, we're actually in a process. We're one of the tribes that are negotiating a treaty right now. So that's why a lot of these things are sort of like, I wouldn't say up in the air. They're being addressed there. So, but we're also in lockdown too. So I actually live an hour and 45 minutes away from my job. The archives are in Pembroke. So I have when I used to, before all of this happened, I had to drive to work. So it's kind of, when I get requests and things like that, I have to jump in my car and go in there physically and deal with these things. So, but consultation because we're negotiating with Canada and BC, and with the laws that came into place there that sort of made industry consult with us. It was more than just picking up the phone and talking to somebody in the office and saying, okay, I consulted with them and go ahead with this. So this is kind of, I'd say, not the same thing, but kind of sort of. It's like, I wouldn't feel comfortable if somebody got on Zoom and said, oh, we're going to be doing this. Okay, we consulted. And it's like, no. So I just wanted to just raise that for anyone that is just where we're at in terms of negotiating in BC, where things are a little more clear cut in terms of that word consultation. Okay, thanks.
I will throw out too, one of the things that I've learned working with the NAGPRA office here at IU is that consultation is not a checkbox. Just as land acknowledgements shouldn't also be a checkbox that you just mark off and say you did. It's not sending a letter out, it's continued. So.
Thank you all very much. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, and just in addition to what Margaret said, like there's, the meetings that we've had with the Ktunaxa and with other communities connected to these records, we're planning on spending years on this. This is, Margaret and I we had that meeting in February, and we had hoped, except for that COVID came, that we would have many, many more in the meantime between then and now. But yeah, it's definitely something that goes on for decades. It has to continue and continue. That's what the word relationship is. It's something that doesn't just happen once.
Of course, thank you very much to you all, of course, for your insights and your expertise and sharing those insights with all of us today. I could spend all day speaking with you all about this topic in particular, but I think we are all beholden to the time slot that APS has outlined for us. So I don't know if there's any other things housekeeping-wise, Adriana, that need to be stated.
Yeah, just really quickly, I wanted to again thank our speakers for their perseverance during this panel, and to all of you watching at home. I know Krystiana has to hop off. I just wanted to remind people that we have sessions tomorrow at 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a session on Indigenous researchers and non-Native archives, and one on community-based language revitalization. So I hope you'll be able to join us for those conversations then. And we will be making these videos available on our website, so you can listen to the conversation again and follow up with our speakers at that time. So thank you all again, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.